Hello students, KTHM College, Department of Political Science, Class FYBA, FYBCom and FYBSc. So students, the credit subject is organized for you. The subject name is Democracy, Election and Governance. So myself Chandanshive Vasudha welcome you all for this subject, and in this chapter, the first chapter we are going to learn is that democracy, it's a foundation and dimensions. So the first and a historical and philosophical background of our Indian constitution we are going to discuss. So let's begin. Now we will start with the first unit, that is philosophy of the Indian constitution. In the introductory part we will say uh, we are learning about the constitution, so I will give you some introductory part of the constitution. The Constitution of India is made by Constituent Assembly according to the Cabinet Mission Plan. The legislative assemblies of the provinces were to elect their representative to the Constituent Assembly. Total member of Constituent Assembly were 389. Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the President of the Constituent Assembly. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru moved the objective resolution which reflected the ideals and philosophy that shaped the Indian Constitution. The Constituent Assembly completed work in 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. From 26 January 1950, Constitution of India came into force. Hence, 26 January we celebrated as Republic Day. The Constitution of India is the supreme law of India. It is living document, an instrument which makes the government system work. It lays down the framework defining fundamental political principle, establish the structure, procedures, powers, and we will say duties of government institution, and set out fundamental rights, directive principle, and duties of the citizen towards our nation, towards our state. So this is the introduction of the topic. So we will move further. The first topic is of the constitutional history of India, that is 1600 East India Company established. So the British came to India in 1600 as a trader, but they found that there is no match in India. There is discrimination of caste. The education system was very poor. So as they established their trading here, they started participating in the political items here. So in that case they got the control, they got the power in India. So the East India Company was established and the Indians were ruled by the East India Company. So after that, the next point is there was the Regulating Act in of 1773. So what was the act? So this act is of a great constitutional importance. First, it was the first step taken by the British government to control or regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. It recognized for the first time the political and administrative function of company, and it laid the foundation of central administration in India. So in this regulating act, East India Company was abolished and the power was in the hand of British rule. So after that, in this act, it designated the government of Bengal as the Governor General of Bengal and created an executive council of 4 members to assist him. The first such governor was Lord Hastings. It made the governor of Mumbai and Madras presidents subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal, unlike earlier when the three presidents were independent of one another. In this act, we will say, it also provided for the establishment of Supreme Court at Calcutta in 1774, comprising one Chief Justice and three other judges. After that, it prohibited the servant of company from engaging in any private trade or accepting presents of bribings from the natives. It strengthened the control of British government over the company by requiring the court of directors. It means governing body of the company. The court of directors was requiring to report on its revenue, civil and military affairs in India. So this was the Regulating Act 1773. After that, we will switch on to the next point, that is Pitt's India Act. Pitt's India Act is that in bid to rectify the defects of the Regulating Act of 1773. In this act, the ratification of the Act 1773 was made. The British Parliament passed the Amendment Act of 1781, and it is also known as the Act of Settlement. And the next important act was the Pitt's Act of 1784. So it distinguished between the commercial and political function of the company. In this act, it allowed the code of director to manage the commercial affair, but created a new body called Board of Control of Management. The political affair, it controlled the political affairs. Thus, it established a system of a double government. In this act of the Pitt's Act, the double government was formed. It also empowered the Board of Control to supervise and direct all operations of civil and military government or revenues of the British possessions in India. So we will say the act was significant for two reasons. First, the company's territory in India for the first time called the British possessions in India. And the second one, we will say the British government was taken the supreme control over company's affair in its administration in the India. So this were the three acts of the constitutional history of India. Now, after the three acts were passed, the next was the proclamation given by the Queen Elizabeth. She gave the proclamation that there will be no discrimination in the Indians. They will be given equal treatment in the job opportunities, and there will be no discrimination on the basis of religions. She gave this proclamation in 1858. But in that era, the British introduced the English learning in India for the Indians. So the Indian people were introduced to the education of the Western ideologies. So they were introduced as the term of freedom, nationalism, secular. Then they were introduced with the many terms. So this was the one, we will say, one advantage of British rule, that India was given the English education here. Education was introduced in India. So it gave the rise of nationalism in our Indians, and as they were learning So they were getting the knowledge that we are not free, the British are ruling on us. So it gave the rise to the nationalism. So when it gave the as it gave the rise of nationalism, the one and the main aspect was formed that in 1885 Indian National Congress was established. It was established for the basic need of the Indians. They were in the National Congress. They were they want their freedom. The main object was that they want freedom. So the 1885 the proclamation key of the Queen and the education was introduced. It gave them it gave the rise of nationalism, and in that nationalism in 1885 the Indian National Congress was established. So in that way it was the first revolution of Indians. After that, the next act was the Act 1909, and it is also known as a Morley Minto Act. So in this Morley Minto Act, uh, it considerably increased the size of the legislative council, both at the central and provisional. The number of members in the central legislative council was raised from 16 to 60. The number of members in provisional legislative council was not uniform. It retained official majority in the central legislative council but allowed the provisional legislative council to have non-official majority. So in enlarging the deliberative function of the legislative council at the both level, for example we will say they were allowed to ask supplementary question, move resolution on the budgets, and so on. So they our Indians were not allowed to ask the question in the council, in the legislative council. But by the Act of 1909, it means Morley Minto Act, they were given the they were allowed to ask the supplementary questions and also move the resolution on the budgets. After that, for the first time association of Indians were with the executive council of the viceroy and government. And in that council, Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the viceroy executive council, and he was appointed as the law member. Okay, it introduced a system of communal representation for Muslim by accepting the concept of separate electorate. Under this, Muslim members were to be elected only by the Muslim. The separate electorate, it means that only that if the Muslim member is representing only a Muslim voter is allowed to vote him. Thus, the act Act Communism and Lord Minto came to be known as the father of the communal electorate. So, it provided for the separate representation for presidency, corporation, chamber of commerce, universities, and zamindars. So, this was the Morley Minto Act. So, it gave rise to the council, and one Indian was added as a law member in the viceroy executed, and the viceroy executed member was Satyendra Prasad Sinha. Now we will switch on to the next point of the constitutional history of India. In that we will see 1919 Montagu Chelmsford Reform Act. It is also known as Government of India Act 1990. On August 20, 1917, the British government declared for the first time that its objective was to gradual introduction of responsible government in India. The Government of India Act of 1990 was enacted which came into force in 1921. Now, at that time, Montagu was the Secretary of State for India and Lord Chelmsford was the Viceroy of India. So, according to that, the 1990 Montagu-Chelmsford Reform this act was named. In that, it relaxed the central control over the provinces by demarcating and separating the central and provisional subject. The central and provisional legislature were authorized to make law on their respective list of subjects. The structure of government continued to be central and unitary. Now, it further divided the provisional subject into two parts. The first one was transferred and reserved was the second one. The transfer subject were to be administered by the governor with the aid of minister responsible to the legislative council. After that, the reserve subject on the other hand were to be administered by the government and its governor and his executive council without being responsible to the legislative council. This dual scheme of governance was known as diarchy. This term was derived from the word diarchy, which means double rule. After that, for the first time, it introduced the bicameralism and direct election in the country. The Indian Legislative Council was replaced by a bicameral legislature consisting of upper house, which is known as Council of State, and a lower house, which is known as Legislative Assembly. The majority of members of both the houses were chosen by direct election. It required that the 3 of 6 members of Viceroy Executive Council were to be Indian, but the condition was that other than the commander-in-chief. It extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, and Europeans. It granted franchise to a limited number of people on basis of property, tax, or education. After that, it created a new office of a High Commissioner for India in London and transferred to him some of the functions which were performed by the Secretary of State for India. It also provided for the establishment of Public Service Commission. Hence, a Central Public Service Commission was set up in 1926 for recruiting civil servants. Now, for the first time, this act separated provisional budgets from the central budget and authorized the provisional legislature to enact their budget. It provided for the appointment of statutory commissioner to inquire into report on its own working after 10 years of its coming into force. This was Act Montagu-Chelmsford 1990 Act. After that, we will move further. The next act we will see it is 1935 Government of India Act. Now, as the act marked a second milestone towards a completely responsible the act marked a second milestone toward a completely responsible government in India. Government in India. It was a lengthy and detailed document having 321 sections and 10 schedules. It provided for the establishment of an all India federation consisting of provinces and principal state as unit. The act divided the power between the central and units in a term of 3 lists. The first list was federal list for center with 59 items. After that, provisional list for provinces for 54 items and the concurrent list for both with 36 items. Powers were given to the viceroy. The federation never came into being as the principal state did not join it. It abolished diarchy in the provinces and introduced a provisional autonomy in its place. The provinces were allowed to act as autonomous units of administration in their defined spheres. Moreover, the Act introduced responsible government in provinces, that is, the governor was required to act with the advice of minister responsible to the provisional legislature, and this came into effect in 1937 and was discontinued in 1939. It provided for the adoption of diarchy at the center. Consequently, 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 the federal subjects were divided into reserve subject and transfer subject. This provision of Act did not came into operation at all. It introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces. Thus, the legislature of Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam and United Provinces were made bicameral, consisting of legislative council, means upper house, and legislative assembly, lower house. Many restrictions were placed on them. It further extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for depressed class in sense scheduled caste, then women's and labor, means workers. After that, it abolished the Council of India, established by Government of Act of 1858. The Secretary of State for India was provided with a team of advisors. It extended franchise. About 10% of total population got the voting right. It provided for the establishment of Reserve Bank of India to control the currency and credit of the country. It provided for the establishment of not only a Federal Public Service Commission but also Provisional Public Service Commission and Joint Public Service Commission for 2 or more provinces. It provided for the establishment of Federal Court, which was set up in 1937. So this was the Government of Act of 1935. Now we will see the last act, that is Indian Independence Act 1947. On February 20, 1947, the British Prime Minister Silman Alid declared that the British rule in India would end by June 30, 1948, after which the power will be transferred to responsible Indian hands. This announcement was followed by aggression by the Muslim League, demanding Muslim League demanding partition of country. Again on June 3rd, 1947, the British government made it clear that any constitution framed by a Constituent Assembly of India cannot apply to those part of country which were unwilling to accept it. On the same day, 3rd June 1947, Lord Mountbatten, the Viceroy of India, put forward the partition plan known as the Mountbatten Plan. The plan was accepted by the Congress and the Muslim League. Now we will switch on to the next point of the constitutional history of India. The second point is Committee of Constituent Assembly. In that, the first one is, in that committee, will go through it. The first point will be Cabinet Mission. Now, it was in 1934 that the idea of Constituent Assembly for India was put forth for the first time by M.N. Roy, a pioneer of communist movement in India and an advocate of radical democratism. In 1935, the Indian National Congress for the first time officially demanded a Constituent Assembly to frame the Constitution of India. In India, in 1938, Jawaharlal Nehru, on behalf of Indian National Congress, declared that the Constitution for free India must be framed without outside interference by a Constituent Assembly elected on the basis of adult franchise. Now, this demand was finally accepted by principle by the British government in what is known as the August Offer of 1940. In 1942, Sir Cripps, a member of cabinet, came into India with a draft proposal of the British government on the framing of an independent constituent to adopted after the World War II. The Cripps proposals were rejected by the Muslim League, which wanted India to be divided into two autonomous states with two separate constituent assemblies. Finally, a cabinet mission was sent to India. While it rejected the idea of two constituent assembly, it put forth a scheme for the constituent assembly which more or less satisfied by the Muslim League. Now, the Constituent Assembly was constituted in November 1946 under the scheme formulated by Cabinet Mission Plan. Now, the total strength of the Constituent Assembly was to be 389. Of this, 296 seats were to be allotted to British India and 93 states to the princely states. Out of 296 seats allotted to British India, 92 members were to be drawn from the 11 governors, provinces and 4 from the 4 chief commissioner provinces, one from each. Each provinces and princely state were to be allotted seats in proportions to their respective population. Roughly 1 seat was to be allotted for every million population. Seats allotted to each British province were to be decided among the 3 principal communities, and the communities were Muslim, Sikhs and Journal in the proportions to their population. The representative of each community were to be elected by member of that community in the provisional legislative assembly, and voting was to be done by the method of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. The representative of princely states were to be nominated by the heads of the princely state. So this was according to Cabinet Mission. After that, the next point is the election of Constituent Assembly. Now the Constituent Assembly was to be a partly elected and a partly nominated body. Moreover, the members were to be indirectly elected by members of the Provisional Assembly, who themselves were elected on a limited franchise. The election to the Constituent Assembly were held in July-August 1946. The Indian National Congress won 208 seats, the Muslim League 73 seats, and the small groups and independents got the remaining 15 seats. However, the 93 seats were allotted to the princely states were not filled as they decided to stay away from the Constituent Assembly. So, although Constituent Assembly was not directly elected by people of India on the basis of adult franchise, the assembly comprised representatives of all sections of Indian society: Hindu, Muslim, Sikhs, Parsis, Anglo-Indians, Indian Christian, SC, ST, including women of all these sections. The assembly included all important personalities of India at that time, with the expectation of Mahatma Gandhi and M.A. Jinnah. After that, the next point is the first meeting of Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly held its first meeting on December 9, 1946. The Muslim League boycotted the meeting and instead of the separate state of Pakistan. The meeting was thus attended by only 211 members. And at that time, Dr. Sachidananda Sinha, the oldest member, was elected the temporary president of assembly, following the French practice. Okay, after that, then later on 11 December 1946, Dr. Rajendra Prasad and H.C. Mukherjee were elected as the president and vice president of assembly, respectively. And Sir B.N. Rao was appointed as constituent advisor to the assembly. So, this was the introduction. The next point is the committees of Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly appointed a number of committees to deal with different tasks of constitution making. Out of this, 8 were major committees and the other were minor committees. And the names of the committees and chairmen we will see. We will see some of them. First, we will take the major committee. In this committee, Union Power Committee was there. The chairman was Jawaharlal Nehru. After that, Union Constituent Committee, Jawaharlal Nehru. Provisional Constituent Committee, Sardar Patel. Drafting Committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights and Minorities, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. In this committee, 2 subcommittees were there. In that, Fundamental Rights subcommittee was under J.B. Kripalin. Minor subcommittee was headed by H.C. Mukherjee. After that, Rules of Procedure Committee, Dr. Rajendra Prasad. After that, State Committee, Jawaharlal Nehru. Steering Committee, Dr. Rajendra Prasad. These are some major committees. After that, we will go through the minor committees. In that, the first committee is Committee on the Functions of Constituent Assembly, G.V. Mavlankar. After that, Order of Business Committee, Dr. K.M. Munshi. House Committee, B. Pattabhai Sitaramaiah. After that, Special Committee of Examine the Draft Constitution, Aladi Krishnan Swamy Iyer. After that, Finance and Staff Committee, A.N. Sinha. Hindi Translation Committee was there. Urdu Translation Committee was there. Press Gallery Committee. Committee to examine the effect of Independence Act of India 1947. These are some minor committees. After that, the last one is committee, that is Drafting Committee. Among all the committees of Constituent Assembly, the most important committee was the Drafting Committee, set up on August 29, 1947. This committee was entrusted with the task of preparing a draft of a new constitution. In this, it consists of 7 members. They were as follows, like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he was chairman, L. Gopal Swamy Iyengar, Krishnan Swamy Iyer, Dr. K.M. Munshi, Sayyid Muhammad Sadullah, and Madhav Rao He was replaced by B.L. Meter, who resigned due to ill health. After that, T.T. Krishnan Manchari, he replaced by D.P. Kaithan, who died in 1948. The drafting committee, after taking into consideration of the proposal of the various committees, prepared the first draft of Constitution of India, which was published in February 1948. The people of India were given 8 months to discuss the draft and propose amendments. In the light of public commitments, criticisms, and suggestions, the drafting committee prepared a second draft, which was published on October 1948. The drafting committee took less than 6 months to prepare its draft. In all, it sat only for 141 days. So, this is all about the constituent history of India. We have done with the constituent history of India. So, thank you.